So Brian in Alexandria wanted this house here. So Brian in Alexandria wanted this house, but there was a bid that was higher, but they still got it. And then this here, this was the house that Chris and Rachel wanted. And on this one, we found out before we presented that the sellers already had an all-cash offer in hand, but they got it despite the cash buyer's higher offer. So how did we do that? Well, it wasn't just putting an offer together and crossing our fingers. What happened is that we were the buyers that the sellers wanted to choose, and that changes everything. And to do that, there were 5 specific strategies that we put into action well before we ever considered writing an offer. In fact, well before we even saw these 2 houses. And that's what we're going to cover here. And by the way, when we get to number 5, that is my very favorite, and you have almost certainly never heard of it. So, and also, they may feel a little like 5 separate ideas at first, but they all actually work together as one system. So I'm assuming that you're watching this because you have a very specific goal. You want to buy the right house at the lowest possible price and do it in the timing that's right for you. But, and you're aware of this, buying a house isn't like buying something or ordering something from Amazon. There are obstacles in buying a home that you don't have when you're on the Amazon app. And the 5 strategies that I'm going to show you overcome each of these obstacles. And when you understand them and when you can put them into practice, that's when you can achieve your goal. And that right there, that is what I call buying like a pro. That's what Brian and Alexandria did in Fullerton. That's what Chris and Rachel did in Lake Forest. They bought like pros. So hi there, my name is Michael Hausam. I'm an active broker in Southern California, focusing mostly on Orange County. And with House Advantage, I basically do 2 things. I represent buyers and sellers right here in Orange County. And then also I help folks across the country using that same exact system and strategies so they can buy or sell like a pro. And then with that, they can work with whatever real estate agent they want in their area. So I got into the business on the mortgage side about 35 years ago, added the real estate license a decade after that. And I'm a top 5 agent, have consistently in my office and in the top 3% nationally. The reason I bring that bio up is that none of this is theory or dated information. These are things I'm working with clients here in Orange County and across the country every single day. So it used to be that buying a house meant you found the one you liked, wrote up an offer, hopefully negotiated a little bit, and then you were done. Now you might be thinking, wait, isn't that what happens? Well, certainly that's what happens with some people. In fact, maybe most. But when you hear say things like, I see buyers every day that make mistakes, costly mistakes, this is what I'm referring to. Because this is not how pros go about buying a house. They're not just writing up an offer and hoping. They are playing a completely different game. And the name of that game is that they're focused on becoming the buyer that the seller wants to choose. So it's not just writing an offer and hoping it works. Let me tell you what I mean by that. A handful of years ago, my son Jack was selling his motorcycle and the guy showed up to buy it. And Jack was insistent that he was only going to accept the full price, $2,500. So he goes out to meet the guy. A few minutes later, he comes running back in and he hands me a stack of $100 bills. And I'm like, wait a second, Jack, you're 5 bills short. Where are the rest of these things? What happened? So Jack explained that he was sitting there chatting with the guy, and the guy pulled out his wallet and started slowly counting out the money in his hand. So he handed him 20 bills and said, here you go. And Jack just reached out and took it, and that was that. Now, what the guy did with my son was genius. he actually became the buyer that Jack wanted and needed before Jack even realized it. But in doing so, what happened? Jack's certainty about his price, it evaporated. And he took less. Now, obviously, that's a simple example. But there's a real estate version of this story, and that's what we're doing. In all the various different social media platforms this week, I explain the details of my 5 strategies that are necessary to buy a home like a pro. You can go see them on Facebook or Instagram. And they're basically the boots on the ground, tactical things that you need to do to buy a home at an elite level. So what I want to do today is go through the 5 different obstacles that can stand in your way of buying a home, and then how those strategies affect them, okay? It's not disconnected. Hang with me. It's all going to click together, and at the end, you're going to see how it all works as one unified system. And what happens is each one of these strategies overcomes the problems that you as a buyer are confronted with. And, maybe most importantly, they overcome these problems in a way that most buyers and their agents, your competition, never see. So the first, switch the screen here. The first problem that we need to consider is the impression that we want to make on a home seller. So we're going to call this problem number 1, and that is the seller impression. It's basically what they think of you, okay? Most buyers think that the first efforts that they need to make at making a positive first impression is in the offer itself, but it is not. By that point, you're actually already behind. To overcome this problem, the solution I call buyer staging. Buyer staging, okay? And what that does is that controls the impression that you're making on that seller, okay? Switch here. So it's another thing important about this. It's not just the first impression that we're addressing here. It's every impression, multiple impressions that you're making all along the way. And just like a stage in a theater, everything else that happens is on top of it. It's basically the foundation, okay? And there's 2 aspects to buyer staging, and both of it, yours as the buyer and then your agents. All of these things are in motion well before your first impression is made. So it's part of everything that happens up until the offer is made, and then counter offers and negotiations and everything after that. That is why buyer staging is so powerful and is so impactful. A buyer that doesn't do buyer staging properly, they have no solid foundation along the way in their real estate journey, okay? So, number 2, the next problem we have to confront is the complexity of a real estate transaction, right? It's not like Amazon. A real estate contract itself is not simple. So, problem number 2, we have to confront complexity. All the various different parts in the contract that have to come together that defines an agreement between you and a seller. And to do this, the solution, I call it, we practice the contract. This strategy is having an understanding of the basic rules of the game. So it is to understand the rules. So most people most buyers. Let me give you an example. This will be better. So a few years ago, I was doing a buyer consultation with some folks discussing about how I would go about helping them buy a home, okay? Turns out they had actually previously tried to buy a house and were under contract and ended up having to cancel it for a repair-related issue. And what they've been doing is working directly with listing agents instead of hiring their own agent. They figured that would kind of give them an insider deal. Now, this can be a total pro-level move, working directly with the listing agent, by the way, but only if you operate like a pro. Anyway, so when we got to the point of the conversation about practicing the contract, this strategy here, I actually asked them to pull up the offer that they had written on the previous sale on their phone. And this is something that I do whenever possible, because I usually know that within like 20 seconds of looking at somebody's offer, I can always find something to talk about, something to point out and identify, hey, this right here was a costly mistake that you made, and this is what the pro buyer would do instead. So they pulled it up, we were looking through it, and in this case, I didn't just find something to talk about, I found something that was catastrophic. Their agent, remember, they were working with the listing agent. They had filled out the cost allocation section of the contract in such a way that all of the seller's closing costs were going to be paid for by the buyer. There's a section, it's on page 3, it says in the California contract, it says cost allocation at the top, and it lists all the various different closing costs, okay? In this case, all of them were getting paid by the buyer. And in that price range, the house that they were looking at, that was about $14,000 of extra costs. So I pointed this out to them, and they were immediately defensive. They're like, oh, no, that can't be true. He's a great guy. He's kind of the neighborhood pro. Everybody loves him. And he worked so hard to help us get this deal and work with the seller. It was a win-win. And I'm like, well, maybe. And I just pointed it out to him here and here and here and explained it to him. They couldn't believe it. And obviously, they had never heard of this second strategy to practice the contract, to understand the rules of the game before you go to play. Now, fortunately for them, that deal fell apart. Otherwise, they would have paid those $14,000 in costs, and they likely never would have known it. Now, imagine had they done that, and then at some point did find out what happened. Imagine you did that. You find out later that you were guided incorrectly or you didn't know what you didn't know, and it was a $14,000 mistake, right? Way to kind of think about this. If you ever played Monopoly or a game like that has a complicated rule book, there's always somebody that you're playing with usually that has extra knowledge about some obscure clause in the game or the rule, and they end up using that for their advantage, for their benefit. That's what this strategy is all about. It's exactly like that, okay? The California contract is 18 pages long. Now, not all state contracts are that long, but the first time buyers see this thing is in DocuSign on their phone, rushing to get it signed under the pressure and the emotion of hopefully getting a house. And I don't think that's the first time that you should see the contract. There's too much money on the line. There's too many important things that can go on to see it back then. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need to be a legal expert or get some postgraduate degree in contract law, okay? But you need to have a working understanding of all of the various moving parts. Frankly, even just a half-assed effort of doing this, practicing the contract strategy, just that alone is going to put you ahead of most of your competition and frankly, most of their agents as well, okay? So now, we've practiced the contract, we've set up our buyer staging. The next problem we have to confront is marketplace fog, okay? The next problem, I call it marketplace fog. And the solution to the marketplace fog, I call the home quest. So here's what I mean by that, okay? What's going on in the specific marketplace that you're focused on? Do you know, okay? Are prices trending up or are they trending down? Is inventory increasing or decreasing? On any particular house, do you know relatively, is it priced high or low or just right? And how do you know any of these things, okay? This problem of marketplace fog, of not being aware and clear and having knowledge, that's how buyers chase deals that aren't actually deals. So the solution here, the home quest, is designed to give you awareness. Okay? The idea for that, market awareness, it's not just having Zillow in the #1 slot at the bottom of your dock on your phone. That is not market awareness. What it is it's having a system in place and sufficient knowledge so that when you walk in any new listing in your target market segment, you have a good idea of where that house fits in the marketplace, okay? And there's two kind of different things going on here. It's an understanding of where you think that house fits in the marketplace, but it's also how the seller is positioning it in the marketplace. And sometimes those are two very different things, okay? You may have a perception of where the house fits, and either the way the seller has described it or the way the seller has priced it is a mismatch. And that's an important thing to know. Fairly regularly, I will get a call or a text from a buyer client about a house that they've just seen on the marketplace. And it always goes something like this. Hey Mike, check out this house. There must be something wrong. It seems like it's too good of a price. And I know 99% of the time instantly what's going on. There's a national real estate company that runs an auction model as part of their marketing plan, okay? And they do this auction as a way to kind of goose up interest and to try to drive up the price by setting up a bidding war, okay? And whenever one of their listings comes to market, there's always a flurry of activity around them, right? And you can understand why. It's because they always price the houses low. Intentionally, they list the price at 15 or 20 or even 25% below the market. And this gets a lot of people very excited. Okay? Now, personally, I hate the approach. I hate that it's frankly a bait and switch because they really have no intention of selling it at that price. It just is to draw people in. But what it also does is it reveals all of the buyers who have no strategy 3. They have no home quest strategy for marketplace awareness in their plan, right? To them, that price, it's not a red flag because they don't have the correct knowledge and perspective on the marketplace. I don't want you to be one of these buyers. Imagine having a system that has helped you develop market awareness and the confidence that that would give you, okay? So now, once we've taken care of that with the home quest, the marketplace fog problem, we're now on to the problem number 4 that you're going to have to confront, and that is the perceived value of your offer, okay? And here's what I mean by that. So this is problem number 4. This is perceived value. The perceived value of your offer. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. This is focused on the layer below the offering price, okay? You can have 2 prices on 2 different offers that are identical, but those offers can be completely different. And the solution to this, the solution to perceived value is what I call offer sharpening. For Chris and Rachel, the house at the very beginning that competed against the all-cash buyer, this particular solution for them was worth about $35,000. Their offer was more attractive to the seller despite the price itself being less. And this isn't just negotiating, okay? This is far more powerful than just negotiating. And what it is we get to value. Okay. So that's what the offer sharpening does, is increases the perceived value. And the context of an all-cash offer, this probably makes a bunch of sense to you because everybody understands that an all-cash offer is kind of the gold standard, right? Because an all-cash offer is simple. There's no financing. They just wire the money. There's no loan involved. So everybody thinks that, sellers think an all-cash offer is the best. And if a buyer finds out there's a competing all-cash offer. Thing is there's more moving parts in an offer than just whether or not there's going to be a loan as well, okay? And even with getting a loan, there are still moving parts that can be adjusted, okay? And so this solution, number 4, the offer sharpening, it piggybacks on practicing the contract strategy number 2. Because you need to understand the contract first, okay? But the idea is, for strategy 4, the offer sharpening, is to tailor and adjust the contract to increase the advantage for the seller. And you do that by reducing or eliminating all the various items in the contract that skew it to the buyer advantage. And here's what I mean by this. In the contract themselves, California's and everybody else's, there are multiple different levels and dials buried in there, options, contingencies, time periods, potential cancellations for the buyer, and more, okay? The way all of these things are set up can make a massive difference, okay? In the case of both of the examples at the beginning, Brian and Alexandria and Chris and Rachel, there was such a difference between what our offer had versus the others that the seller preferred ours and gave up some money to do it, okay? And that's why practicing the contract up front is important. You need to know how the contract works before you start to change it. When I first got into the business, the California purchase contract was 4 pages long. And in those years, they've added 14 more pages to it. Now, interesting, almost all of these changes are due to lawyers and billable hours. That's part of it, certainly. But it's also due to increasing the safety and the guardrails to protect the buyer. Very little of the changes over the last 30-some years, all those pages, are actually written to benefit a seller. It's all buyer protections, okay? So what this strategy does, in effect, is to wisely and carefully make adjustments to increase the benefit of the offer for the seller. Recently, I had a conversation with an agent. So their buyers were interested in a listing of mine, and she was going over the offer with me. And as we're kind of going back and forth, it got a little bit tense. Right? Because I was pushing back on some of the things in the offer that, in my opinion, aren't fair to a seller, the way they'd written it up, okay? And then she pushed back hard against me. Good for her. But then in the middle of it, this is what she said. She was a little frustrated. She goes, look, I'm going to do everything I can to protect my clients as much as possible, as much as the contract allows, okay? Which is great, right? I appreciated the sentiment. I appreciated her tenacity. But what she was also doing was reducing that offer's appeal to our side of the table, okay? So this agent, and therefore their buyers, they didn't understand this concept, and this is so common. I literally see it all the time. Now, in this particular case, because of the way they approached that, they ended up paying more for the house. They didn't sharpen their offer, they dulled their offer. You don't want to present a dulled offer. Okay, so now once we've figured out all of that stuff and we've sharpened the offer, now we need to get that offer in front of a seller. That brings us to problem number 5. And problem number 5 is the offer environment. And as I mentioned before, the solution, strategy number 5, is my favorite for all of these things. So let's see here. Change this. So problem number 5 is the offer environment. And here's what I mean by that. In the vast majority of cases, buyers email their offers off to a listing agent. If you bought a house in the last 10 years, almost certainly you emailed your offer to the listing agent. But then what happens is it goes into this little black box. And once it goes into that black box, nobody other than the listing agent and the seller knows what happens, right? Does your offer get shopped around town? Is the listing agent trying to get their own buyer in the deal to snake it from you? Or it might take a day or 2 or 3 days before you hear anything back. Most buyers never see the process that they're competing inside, okay? It's like you're out in the field with the lights off and a blindfold on and you're still trying to play the game. That's what happens. So, for strategy number 5, the solution to that, instead of just hitting send on the email and then waiting and wondering what happens, we do something very different. We control the narrative and the process by presenting the offer in person. So we present in person. And that controls the narrative and the process. That's the reason we want to do it in person. Switch back. So 4 or 5 years ago, let me tell you a story about this. 4 or 5 years ago, some clients and I were setting up an offer meeting at a house that they wanted up in the city of Orange. And there was a bit of back and forth with the listing agent about presenting it in person. Finally, the guy agreed, okay? And then the wife, Danielle, said that she needed to check with her mom to watch their 2 little kids. They had like an 18-month-old and a 3.5-year-old, okay? And I told her to not only bring the kids to the meeting, but also to bring the mom. So fast forward to the meeting. In the middle of the meeting, it was already getting tense with the listing agent back and forth about the price. We had a counter offer, and his seller was there as well, and they were pretty quiet through all of this back and forth that was kind of tense. So we're in another part of the house waiting for a response to them because we met at the house itself. So we're waiting for a response in another room, and then the seller came walking in, not the agent. The seller came walking in, and she immediately got emotional. And she told us that she was going to ignore all the counter offers that had been back and forth, and that they were going to accept the original offer that we had written to them. And obviously we were completely surprised by this. And then she explained. So she was selling the family home that she was raised in. And in the middle of all this back and forth, she realized that when her parents had bought this house, she and her older brother were about the same age as Scott and Danielle's kids. So she saw that what we were trying to do was basically the same thing her folks did, just 60 years later. She further explained that when all that was going on, she called her brother, told him what was happening, and they came to this decision to just take our original offer. Now, for Scott and Danielle, that little thing right there was about a $50,000 swing. It was over 5% of the purchase price between what we had offered, where our counters were, and where we ended up getting back down to. And all of it was because we showed up and did it in person. If we'd been trading PDFs via email like robots, it would have never happened. Now, does this happen all the time like this? Of course not. But that's part of the thing for the strategies, is that you need to put yourself in the right position, because if you don't do that, it's guaranteed to never happen. Funny thing about this strategy in person, when I talk to an agent that's roughly my age, I always hear from them, oh my God, this is the way we used to do it. It's so much better. Human beings meeting one another and working something out. 100%. Human beings interacting with one another is so different than just digitally playing ping pong with traded PDFs. Okay. Where that comes down to, there's a bunch of different benefits that, you know what, I don't think I have time to go into the detail. Just understand that this idea of changing the offer environment by doing it in person, it can be the single most significant difference between you getting the right house or losing it altogether and getting the very best price for it, okay? Now, another thing, I want you to think about all 5 of these strategies very much like ingredients in a recipe, okay? They're not individual standalone items. They all work together, just like in any recipe. You need to use all the ingredients in a recipe to get the result that you want, right? You can't just decide, I'm not going to put sugar in the mix, because then your cookies will be terrible, okay? But in addition to using all the ingredients, you need to use them in the right sequence, and you need to use the right amounts of them. That's the analogy that I like, okay? And then what happens is they all end up kind of stacking on top of one another, leveraging and increasing influence. The end result of that is changing how a seller sees and experiences you, and it also changes the certainty that they have about their price. It's definitely a new way of thinking about things, okay? Another reason to use all of these various different strategies as opposed to picking and choose them is that it's kind of the way that we solve the big unknown question that every buyer has. The big unknown question is, what is really going on with the seller and what is really important to them? Because here's the thing, you're likely never going to know what the truthful answer is, okay? Their agent may not know the answer to that question. Even they may not know what's really important to them. So all of these strategies, think of it as like a shotgun, right? It shoots a wide pattern to hit multiple targets. And you kind of can't see those targets, and you don't really know which of them is the important one. Just like with Danielle and Scott, we've been working these other 4 strategies, but it turned out for us in that case, it was the 5th strategy of doing it in person that was the really important one, right? And there was no way that the listing agent had any idea about how important that having the kids and being a family would be. He'd fought us on trying to do it in person. And the sellers themselves, it's not like she thought, oh, well, this is a young family, I'm interested. She didn't realize how important that aspect was until the moment they saw the Belcher kids and we were all sitting there. And frankly, even if they had discussed it, right, ahead of time, hey, you know what? We don't want an investor. We want a really nice family to get mom and dad's house. That itself is still different than seeing the 2 little kids that were the same age that they were when they got the house, okay? So you have to put all of these strategies in play in the correct way all the way to the end. This is the way you get a seller to want you. Also notice with this, in all these 5 strategies, there's no mention of offer price or negotiating schemes, okay? Obviously, those are important things. My clients get that particular discussion on both of those as well. But negotiating and the price that you offer, those are all secondary to the work and the positioning to even get us to the point where price is even a topic, Okay? It's all done in advance. And then one last thing I do want to mention as well before we close off here. We're doing good on time. One more thing I want to touch on, and that is the phrase mentioned at the beginning and in the title of this. Don't be a passenger, okay? This is another concept that clearly separates the pro-level buyer from anybody else. A pro buyer takes control of their own journey. They have their own plan laid out in advance. They know what steps that they want to take, and they make sure that those steps are being followed. That's why a pro buyer can work with any agent they want, because they're the ones that are driving. The average home buyer, your competition, they're not driving. They're just a passenger. And they're just a passenger for the agent that they hired, or they're a passenger to their own assumptions about the way they think a house should be purchased. And that's usually some version of, well, I've done this before, or I did some research online and I think I'm good, okay? That's passenger thinking. The key thing about passengers don't pick the destination, and they also don't pick the route. And that's why my goal for you is that you buy like a pro and not be a passenger, okay? So now, where do you go from here? Great, you've convinced me. What do I do now? So there are two things that I hope you take away from today, okay? And these are the things that I really want you to remember, to think about. Number one is that buying well isn't just about finding the right house. It's about becoming the buyer that the seller wants to choose, okay? And that is, you want to become the seller's ideal buyer. That's the first thing that you want. And then number two, I'm going to say this again. Do not be a passenger. Take control of your own home buying journey. Okay, so then the next question from that then is, how ready are you to do both of these things? How ready are you to be the seller's ideal buyer, and how ready are you to not be a passenger? So this is exactly why I created the Real Estate Readiness Assessment. It's free, it just takes 4 minutes, and it's going to help you see where you're already strong in terms of your knowledge about the marketplace and how to proceed as a buyer. But it's also going to show you where you might have gaps and how prepared you really are to buy a house like a pro instead of operating like a passenger. It takes just 4 minutes, and when you're done, you're going to have a much clearer picture of where you stand and then what deserves your attention next. And as I said, it's totally free. So if you click on the link below, or you go to houseadvantage.com, you can also find it there. Let me write that. H-A-U-S, houseadvantage.com. It's the top thing right there on my website, and you can see that, okay? So take that. So thanks so much for spending time with me today. Please become the buyer that the seller wants to choose. Take control of your own journey, and don't be a passenger. Have a great weekend. I'm going to check here to see if there's a chat. No. Stop recording.